Daytime Story 1. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. 3 bears lived in their own house in the woods. There was a big father bear with a deep voice, a mother bear of medium size with a moderate voice, and a little baby bear with a small voice. One morning, the 3 bears were out for a walk, waiting for their breakfast of milk and honey to cool. Then, a mischievous girl named Goldilocks, who had run away from home, came across their house. She peeked through the window to see if anyone was home. Finding there was nobody in the house, she entered the kitchen and decided to try the bear family's breakfast. Father bear's porridge was too hot, mother bear's porridge was too cold, but baby bear's porridge was just right, so she ate it all up. Afterward, Goldilocks went into the living room to rest and saw 3 chairs. Father bear's chair was too hard, mother bear's chair was too soft, but baby bear's chair was just right. Unfortunately, when she sat on the baby bear's chair, the chair broke. Curiosity led Goldilocks up the narrow stairs to the bear's bedroom. She tried out Father bear's bed, but it was too high for her. The mother bear's bed was too low, but the baby bear's bed was just right, so she fell fast asleep on it. When the 3 hungry bears returned home, Father bear roared, "Someone has tasted my breakfast and sat in my chair." Mother bear growled, "Someone has tasted my breakfast and sat in my chair too." Baby bear cried, "Someone has tasted my breakfast, eaten it all up, sat in my chair, and broken it." The bears hurried upstairs, and Father bear exclaimed, "Someone has been on my bed." Mother bear added, "Someone has been on my bed as well." Baby bear, in a panic, shouted, "Someone has been in my bed, and she's right here." Goldilocks woke up, terrified. She quickly jumped out of the bed on the other side, rushed to the window, and escaped. She ran home as fast as she could, never to return to the bear's house again.
Snow White. A long time ago, there was a queen who had a beautiful daughter with skin as white as snow. Her name was Snow White. The nice queen got sick and passed away soon after. The king married a new queen, but she was not nice. She was beautiful but evil. The mean queen often asked her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the prettiest in the land?" "You are the prettiest of all," the magic mirror always said. Little Snow White became even more beautiful. Now she became the most beautiful in the land. One day, when the mean queen asked her magic mirror, the magic mirror said, "You are pretty, but Snow White is even prettier." This made the mean queen angry. She told her hunter to take Snow White into the woods and kill her. In the woods, Snow White asked the hunter for help. "Please, Mr. Hunter, save me. I'll go into the woods and never come back." The hunter agreed, and Snow White ran deep into the woods. After walking for a long time, she found a small house and went inside. Inside, she found small things like 7 small chairs, plates, knives, forks, cups, and beds. In the evening, 7 dwarfs came back and found Snow White asleep. Later, Snow White told them her story, and soon they all became good friends. Now, when the 7 dwarfs went to work, Snow White stayed in the cottage alone. One day, the mean queen asked her magic mirror again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the prettiest in the land?" The mirror replied, "You are pretty, but Snow White is prettier." The queen got even angrier because Snow White was still alive. The mean queen decided to give Snow White a poisoned apple. She dressed up as an old lady and went to the cottage, shouting, "Apples for sale. Buy some apples." She asked Snow White to take a bite of the apple, and when she did, Snow White fell to the floor. When the dwarfs came home, they found Snow White lying on the floor. They thought she was dead, but her body didn't change at all. So, they decided to put her in a glass case instead of burying her. Oh no! Maybe she's not alive anymore. The dwarfs were very sad and couldn't stop crying. A prince from a nearby land saw Snow White in the glass case. Snow White caught the prince's eye. The prince asked, "Can I take this princess to my kingdom?" "Of course," the dwarf said. They tried to lift Snow White's glass case but accidentally dropped it. Snow White's mouth opened, and a piece of apple came out. "Wait, where am I?" Snow White slowly woke up. Hooray! Hooray! The princess is awake. Princess Snow White is awake. The 7 dwarfs were very happy. "My beautiful princess, will you marry me?" the prince asked Snow White. "Yes, my lord," Snow White said. "I will." So, the prince married Snow White, and they lived happily ever after.
Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits named Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a cozy burrow beneath a big fir tree. One morning, their mother, Mrs. Rabbit, told them they could play in the fields or go down the lane, but they must never go into Mr. McGregor's garden. She explained that their father had a bad experience there. He ended up in a pie made by Mrs. McGregor. Mrs. Rabbit then left, urging her little ones to behave and not cause any trouble. Mrs. Rabbit carried a basket and an umbrella as she headed through the woods to visit the bakery. There, she bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, being well-behaved bunnies, decided to go gather blackberries down the lane. But Peter, who was quite mischievous, immediately ran to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, Peter nibbled on some lettuces and French beans. Then, he munched on radishes. However, he soon began to feel sick and went in search of parsley. But as Peter turned the corner of a cucumber frame, he ran into Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was busy on his hands and knees, planting young cabbages. Startled, McGregor jumped up and chased after Peter, waving a rake and shouting, "Stop, thief!" Peter was terrified and dashed all around the garden, forgetting the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other among the potatoes. In his frantic run, he moved on all 4s, going even faster. It seemed he might have escaped entirely if he hadn't accidentally stumbled into a gooseberry net where the large buttons on his jacket got tangled. Peter thought his adventure was over and cried big tears. But friendly sparrows overhead heard him and encouraged him to keep going. Mr. McGregor was coming closer to Peter. However, Peter managed to wriggle out in the nick of time, leaving his jacket behind. Peter rushed into the toolshed and leaped into a can, which would have made a good hiding place if it weren't filled with water. Mr. McGregor was convinced that Peter was in the toolshed, possibly hiding beneath a flower pot. He checked carefully, examining each one. Eventually, Peter sneezed, so Mr. McGregor immediately closed in. He tried to step on Peter, who escaped through a window, knocking over 3 potted plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he had grown tired of chasing Peter. He returned to his gardening work. Peter took a moment to catch his breath and rest. He was out of breath, trembling from fear, and didn't know which way to go. He was also quite wet from sitting in the water-filled can. After a while, Peter began to explore, walking cautiously and looking all around. He discovered a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there wasn't enough room for a chubby rabbit to squeeze underneath it. An old mouse was scurrying in and out over a stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her for directions to the gate, but the mouse had a large pea in her mouth and couldn't respond. She just shook her head. This made Peter cry. Peter then tried to go straight across the garden, but he became increasingly confused. Eventually, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was observing some goldfish. She sat very still, with only the tip of her tail twitching. Peter decided it was best to leave her alone. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Peter went back towards the toolshed. But suddenly, he heard the sound of a hoe. Peter darted under some bushes. However, when nothing happened, he emerged and climbed onto a wheelbarrow to peek over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned, and the gate was beyond him. Peter quietly stepped down from the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight path behind some bushes. Mr. McGregor saw him at the corner, but Peter wasn't concerned. He slipped under the gate and was finally safe in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor was not able to catch Peter. Instead, he hung up Peter's little jacket and shoes as a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked back until he arrived home at the big fir tree. He was so exhausted that he flopped down on the soft sand at the bottom of the rabbit hole and closed his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered where he had left his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Unfortunately, Peter didn't feel very well that evening. His mother put him to bed and prepared some chamomile tea for him. She gave Peter a cup chamomile tea. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. After eating the tea, Peter fell into deep sleep. Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a young girl named Cinderella. She lived with her stepmother and 2 stepsisters who were very mean to her. They made her do all the housework, like making beds and cleaning the floors. Cinderella did all of this work without complaining. She was a kind and lovely girl. Her stepsisters were not nice at all and were jealous of her. Cinderella didn't even have a proper bed to sleep in. She had to sleep by the fireplace, which was covered in ashes. That's why they called her Cinderella. One day, a messenger came to their house with an invitation to a fancy ball at the palace, hosted by the prince. Cinderella's stepsisters were excited and told her to get their fancy dresses ready. They said, "All the handsome young men in the kingdom will be there, and we must look our best." Cinderella wanted to go to the ball too, so she asked, "Can I please come to the ball?" Her stepmother scolded her and said, "You can't go to the ball. You have to help your sisters get ready." Most people would have said no, but Cinderella was so kind-hearted that she agreed to help. On the night of the ball, she ran around helping her stepsisters get ready by ironing their dresses, brushing their hair, and polishing their shoes. When they were finally ready, they left for the ball without saying thank you or goodbye to Cinderella. She was left all alone by the fireplace, crying. "I wish I could have gone to the ball. I may not have fancy clothes, but I still would have loved to go." Suddenly, a kind voice said, "I am your fairy godmother. Don't cry, you will go to the ball. Just do as I say." Cinderella looked at the old lady who had appeared out of nowhere and said, "You're my very own fairy godmother. I will do as you say. Her fairy godmother told her to get a pumpkin from the garden. She touched it with her magic wand, and it turned into a beautiful carriage. Then, she asked Cinderella to bring a mousetrap with 6 white mice in it. The fairy godmother used her magic to turn 4 of the mice into horses and the other 2 into footmen. Now, Cinderella, you can go to the ball, said her fairy godmother. But how can I go in these old clothes? Cinderella asked sadly. Her fairy godmother waved her wand, and Cinderella's rags turned into a beautiful princess gown. She even had delicate glass slippers on her feet. Now, go and enjoy yourself, but remember to leave before midnight or your beautiful clothes will turn back into rags, her fairy godmother warned. I promise I will, Cinderella said as she went to the ball. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, everyone admired her beauty. The prince couldn't stop looking at her and danced with her all night. Cinderella was so happy that she forgot the time. When the clock struck midnight, she had to leave. Goodbye, Your Highness. I have to go, she said, and she ran away. She didn't notice that she left one glass slipper behind. The prince tried to find her, and he sent messengers to try the glass slipper on every girl in the land. When they came to Cinderella's house, her stepsisters tried the slipper, but it didn't fit. Let her try it, the messenger said to Cinderella. It won't fit, one stepsister said. And she wasn't at the ball. To their surprise, the glass slipper fit Cinderella perfectly. Her fairy godmother appeared again and made her look beautiful. The messengers took her to the palace, and the prince was overjoyed to see her. They got married, and everyone came to their wedding, including Cinderella's stepsisters, whom she forgave for being mean to her. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there lived a little girl. She was so sweet and pretty and good that everybody loved her. Especially, her old grandmother was very fond of her. Grandmother made her a little red cloak and hood. This clothes suited her so well that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother told her to take a basket with some butter and eggs and fresh-baked cake to her grandmother. Her grandmother was now ill. The little girl, who was always willing and obliging, ran at once to fetch her red cloak. She took her basket and set out on her journey. On her way to her grandmother's house, she met a wolf. The wolf wished very much to eat her up. But he couldn't do that because some woodcutters were working close by. So the wolf only asked, "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood. Where are you off so early?" Little Red Riding Hood was naive. She did not know how dangerous it was to talk to a wolf. She replied, "I am going to see my grandmother who is ill in bed. I will give her some butter and eggs and a fresh-baked cake that my mother has made for her." "Where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "In the little white cottage at the other side of the woods," answered Red Riding Hood. "Well," said the wolf, "I am going that way, too. If you will let me walk together, I will walk part of the way with you." Little Red Riding Hood didn't suspect no harm and soon set off with the wolf as her companion. In several minutes, Little Red Riding Hood stopped to gather wildflowers for her grandmother. Then the wolf made up a brilliant plan to get the little girl for his dinner. He said, "Little Red Riding Hood, I am busy. We must depart here. Goodbye," and trotted away. As soon as he was out of sight from Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf began to run as fast as he could. In a short time, he reached the grandmother's cottage and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" asked the old grandmother in bed. It is Little Red Riding Hood, answered the wolf with a soft voice. The wolf imitated the voice of Little Red Riding Hood. He added, I have brought you some butter and eggs and a fresh-baked cake which Mother had made for you. Pull the door cord in the secret place, and the latch will go up, said the old grandmother. So the wolf pulled the door cord and opened the door. The wolf straight sprang upon the poor old grandmother and ate her all up in a twinkling. Then the wolf put on her nightcap, got into bed and lay down to wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Very soon there came a little soft tap at the door. Who is there? Called out the wolf. Now he was imitating grandmother's voice. It is Little Red Riding Hood, dear grandmother. I have brought you some butter and eggs and a fresh-baked cake which Mother had made for you. Disguising his voice as much as he could, the wolf called out, Pull the door cord in the secret place, and the latch will go up. So Little Red Riding Hood pulled the door cord and went inside. Good morning, dear grandmother, she said. How are you feeling today? Very bad indeed, my dear, answered the wolf. He was trying to hide himself under the bedclothes. How strange and hoarse your voice sounds, grandmother, said the little girl. I have got a bad cold, my dear, said the wicked wolf. She was surprised to see how strange her grandmother's eyes looked in her nightclothes. Little Red Riding Hood went on, Grandmother, what very big eyes you have. The better to see you with my big eyes, my dear, said the wolf. Grandmother, what very big ears you have. The better to hear you with my big ears, my child. Grandmother, what very long arms you have. The better to hug you with my long arms, my dear. Looking at big mouth and teeth of the wolf, Little Red Riding Hood was beginning to get frightened. But, grandmother, what great big teeth you have, said the girl. The better to eat you with my big teeth, roared the wolf. The wolf suddenly jumped out of bed. He seized poor Little Red Riding Hood and was just about to eat her up. Then there was a great noise outside. The door burst open and several woodcutters rushed in. They had seen the wolf talking to the little girl in the woods. They were worried and came to see what mischief he was up to. They killed the wicked wolf on the spot. Little Red Riding Hood was saved. She ran home to tell her mother all about her terrible adventure. Her mom said, Don't talk to strangers, and let them know about you. Rapunzel. Once upon a time, there was a couple who wanted to have a baby, but they couldn't. The woman started to believe that her wish might come true someday. Their house had a small window at the back, which looked out onto a beautiful garden. It was filled with lovely flowers and plants. But there was a problem. The garden belonged to a powerful witch, and nobody was brave enough to go inside. One day, the woman was standing by the window, looking at the garden. She saw some tasty-looking plants called Rapunzel and really wanted to eat them. She became so obsessed with it that she started to get sick and unhappy. Her husband noticed her sadness and asked what was wrong. She said, I wish I could have some Rapunzel from the garden. If I don't eat it, I think I will die. He loved his wife and couldn't bear to see her suffer, so he decided to get her some Rapunzel, no matter what. In the evening, he climbed over the garden wall and quickly picked a handful of Rapunzel. He brought it to his wife, who made a salad and eagerly ate it. The taste was so delicious that the next day she wanted even more. Her husband had to go back to the garden to get more Rapunzel. But this time, when he reached the bottom of the wall, he saw the angry witch standing there. She scolded him for stealing her plants and threatened him with punishment. He pleaded with her, explaining that his wife was so desperate to eat Rapunzel that she would have died without it. The witch, although still angry, listened to his plea. She agreed to let him take Rapunzel, but on one condition: he had to promise to give her the child his wife would have. The child would be well taken care of, and the witch would treat it as her own. Terrified, the man agreed to the witch's condition. When his wife gave birth, the witch came and took the baby girl, naming her Rapunzel after the fruit's name. Rapunzel grew up to be a beautiful girl with long, golden hair. When she turned 12, the witch locked her in a tall tower deep in the forest. The tower had no stairs or doors, only a small window at the top. Whenever the witch wanted to visit Rapunzel, she would stand below the window and call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had long, beautiful hair that she would let down from the window so the witch could climb up using it. After a year or two, a prince happened to pass by the tower and heard Rapunzel singing. He was captivated by her beautiful voice and wanted to meet her. He searched for a way inside the tower but couldn't find one. But the prince didn't give up. He kept coming back to the tower, hiding and listening to Rapunzel's songs. One day, he saw the witch come and heard her calling for Rapunzel to let down her hair. He had an idea. The next day, he went to the tower and called out the same words, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel let her hair down, and the prince climbed up to see her. At first, Rapunzel was scared because she had never seen a man before. But the prince was kind to her, and they became friends. He told her how her voice had touched his heart and how he couldn't forget her. Rapunzel trusted the prince and agreed to marry him. She was worried about how to leave the tower, so they came up with a plan. The prince would bring silk each time he visited, and Rapunzel would weave a ladder. Once the ladder was done, she would climb down, and they would ride away on the prince's horse. They decided to keep their meetings a secret. The witch didn't know about them until one day when Rapunzel accidentally mentioned how the prince reached the tower much faster than the witch. The witch was furious and cut off Rapunzel's beautiful hair, leaving her alone and miserable in a faraway place. But that same day, the witch used Rapunzel's cut hair to trick the prince. When the prince called out, thinking Rapunzel was there, the witch showed herself and mocked him, saying Rapunzel was gone forever. Devastated, the prince couldn't bear the pain. In his despair, he jumped from the tower, surviving but losing his sight from thorns on the ground. Blind and alone, he wandered in the forest, surviving on roots and berries, grieving for his lost love. They returned to the prince's kingdom, where they were welcomed with happiness and celebration. From that day forward, Rapunzel and the prince lived together in joy and contentment for the rest of their lives.
Peter Pan. Peter Pan visiting London. Peter Pan and Tinker Bell, a fairy, were good friends. One day, Tinker Bell flied into a house in London. Later, Peter Pan got to know Tinker Bell was in a house in London. To find his fairy friend, Tinker Bell, now Peter Pan decided to visit the bedroom of 3 children who lived in London: Wendy, John, and Michael Darling. When he arrived, he found them all fast asleep in their beds. He went around the room and finally found Tinker Bell. When Peter Pan and Tinker Bell were about to leave the house, 3 children woke up. When they looked at Peter Pan and Tinker Bell, they didn't believe their eyes. Peter was very curious about these children, so he decided to use his magic to make them believe in fairies. Flying to Neverland. Peter Pan sprinkled fairy dust over their heads and whispered, think of the happiest things, and you will fly. To the amazement of the children, they suddenly found that they could fly. Peter Pan led them on a magical adventure through the skies to Neverland. Welcome to Neverland. Neverland was a beautiful and magical place, filled with adventures and wonders. There were pirates and mermaids and fairies and other magical creatures. Best of all, there were the Lost Boys, a group of boys who had also flown to Neverland and never wanted to leave. Playing with the Lost Boys. Peter Pan was the leader of the Lost Boys, and he showed Wendy, John, and Michael all around the island. They explored caves and climbed trees and played games. Peter Pan and the Lost Boys even fought against the evil Captain Hook and his pirate crew, who were always trying to catch them. Captain Hook, the terrible pirate. In Neverland, there was also a mean pirate named Captain Hook who sailed the seas with his crew of rough and tough pirates. Captain Hook wore a big hat and a long coat, and he had a hook for a hand because a crocodile had bitten it off long ago. The crocodile also swallowed a clock, and so Hook was always afraid because he could hear the tick-tock of the clock whenever the crocodile was near. Captain Hook and his pirate crew had a big ship called the Jolly Roger. They sailed the seas looking for treasure and causing trouble, but mostly they wanted to catch Peter Pan. Captain Hook was very jealous of Peter's ability to fly and his youthfulness, and he wanted to defeat him. Every time Peter Pan and the Lost Boys saw the Jolly Roger ship approaching, they knew that Captain Hook and his crew were coming for them. But Peter Pan was very brave and clever, and he always managed to outsmart Hook and his pirates. Peter and his friends fought many battles against the pirates, and although they sometimes got into trouble, they always managed to come out on top. So, even though Captain Hook and his pirate crew were very scary, Peter Pan and his friends were always able to defeat them with their bravery and cleverness. Wendy kidnapped. One day, while Peter Pan was away, Wendy and her brothers were captured by Captain Hook and his pirate crew. They were taken to the Jolly Roger, where Hook was waiting for them. He was delighted to have finally captured Peter Pan's closest friend. Wendy was very scared, but she tried to be brave. She stood up to Hook and refused to be intimidated by him. Captain Hook was impressed by her courage and decided to make her his own personal storyteller. Captain Hook already knew that Wendy loved telling stories. He thought that if she told him stories every night, he might not be so afraid of the dark. Brilliant Wendy. At first, Wendy didn't want to tell stories to Hook and his crew, but then she realized that it was her chance to escape. So, Wendy started telling them the story of Peter Pan and his adventures in Neverland. As she told the story, she also gave clues to her brothers about how to escape. Eventually, Wendy's plan worked. Her brothers were able to sneak away from the pirates while they were listening to the story. Wendy was able to distract Captain Hook long enough for them to make their escape. When Hook realized what had happened, he was furious. He tried to capture them again, but they managed to fly away with the help of Peter Pan and Tinker Bell. From that day on, Wendy became even braver and more confident. She had shown that even in the face of danger, she could stay calm and use her wits to outsmart her enemies. Wendy rescued finally. One day, to save Wendy, Peter Pan flew over to where Hook and his pirates were standing and challenged Captain Hook to a duel. Captain Hook was delighted to have the chance to defeat Peter Pan once and for all. They began to fight, but Peter was quick and nimble, and he was able to dodge Hook's attacks. While they were fighting, Wendy quietly snuck away. She knew that she had to get back to the Lost Boys' hideout before the pirates found her. She ran as fast as she could, trying to stay quiet so that the pirates wouldn't hear her. Finally, she made it back to the hideout, where the Lost Boys were waiting for her. They were all very relieved to see her, and they cheered when they heard that Peter Pan had been able to distract Hook and his crew. In the end, Peter and Hook's fight was inconclusive, and both of them retreated. But Wendy was safe, and she knew that she had Peter Pan to thank for her rescue. She felt grateful for his help. She knew that she would always remember their adventure on the island of Neverland. The battle. One day, Peter Pan and his friends, the Lost Boys, were playing in the forest when they heard a commotion coming from the nearby beach. They flew over to investigate and saw that Captain Hook and his pirate crew had landed on the shore. Now, Peter Pan and the Lost Boys had a battle with Captain Hook and his pirate crew. They were at war. Captain Hook was furious with Peter Pan for always foiling his plans and vowed to defeat him once and for all. He challenged Peter Pan to a duel, and Peter accepted. The two began to fight, but Hook was no match for Peter's quickness and agility. Peter flew circles around him, making fool of him with his playful nature. Captain Hook grew angrier and angrier, but Peter Pan seemed to be having the time of his life. Finally, after a long battle, Peter disarmed Hook and sent him tumbling into the sea. The pirates were shocked and started to retreat, realizing that they couldn't defeat Peter and the Lost Boys. But Peter Pan wasn't finished yet. He flew over to the Jolly Roger, where Hook was hiding, and challenged him to one last duel. Captain Hook was reluctant, but he knew that he couldn't back down from a challenge. They began to fight again. But this time, Peter Pan was even more determined to defeat Captain Hook. In the end, Peter's determination paid off. He managed to overpower Hook and knock him unconscious. The pirates were defeated. Peter Pan and his friends were victorious. From that day on, Peter and his friends were free to explore the island of Neverland without fear of being attacked by Captain Hook and his crew. Peter Pan knew that he had won the day, and he felt proud of his bravery and skill. Wendy missing home. Despite all the fun she was having, Wendy began to miss her mother and father. She missed the warmth of their embrace and the comfort of their home. And so, she decided that it was time for her to return to London. Flying back to London. Peter Pan was very sad to hear this, but he knew that Wendy was right. So, Peter Pan helped Wendy and her brothers fly back to their home in London. When they arrived, they found that their mother and father were overjoyed to see them. The children hugged their parents tightly and told them all about their adventures. Memory of Neverland. The children told their parents all about Neverland and the adventures they had with Peter and the Lost Boys. Even though they had grown up a little bit, they never forgot Neverland. And they would not forget Neverland forever.
The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Girl Who Went to the Land of Oz. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Dorothy. She lived with her aunt and uncle and her dog, Toto, on a small farm in Kansas. Her house was so far from the village, so she had no friends ever. Her aunt and uncle were always busy. Dorothy had nobody to play with, except for her dog, Toto. Her dog, Toto, was her only friend. Making friends was her always dream. One day, a big storm was coming to the house. It was a tornado. Her aunt and uncle fled to a basement shelter to escape the house. Only Dorothy and Toto were left in the house. Soon the strong wind picked up Dorothy's house. Outside of the house, the tornado was carrying the house to a magical land called Oz. The magical land, Oz. Dorothy's house was carried by a tornado. It arrived in the magical land of Oz. Accidentally, the house landed on top of the Wicked Witch of the East. She was killed under Dorothy's house. But Dorothy had no idea what happened. She didn't even know where she was. A lot of people gathered in front of Dorothy's house. They were the Munchkins living in the east part of Oz. They were small and kind people. They let Dorothy know that she arrived in the land of Oz and that her house had killed the Wicked Witch of the East. They were happy to be free from the evil witch's rule. They thanked Dorothy and celebrated her arrival. Even though all the people thanked Dorothy, all she wanted to do was to return to her home in Kansas. Dorothy wearing the magical shoes. Then, the Witch of the North arrived. She was a good witch. So, she was called the Good Witch of the North. She also appreciated Dorothy's killing of the evil witch. The Good Witch asked Dorothy to wear the evil witch's shoes because they were magical shoes. But even the Good Witch didn't know how to operate them. After putting on the shoes, Dorothy asked the Good Witch to help her go back home to Kansas. She recommended that Dorothy should meet the wonderful Wizard of Oz to go back to her home, following the yellow road to the Emerald City. The Good Witch also gave Dorothy a kiss mark as a gift. Her kiss mark was a magical protection that would keep Dorothy unhurt. Dorothy and Toto started to go on a journey to the Emerald City in order to meet the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Meeting the Scarecrow. On her journey, Dorothy saw a scarecrow who didn't have a brain. He wanted to have a brain so that he could think and learn new things. Out of pity, Dorothy made up her mind to help the scarecrow. She asked him to join her to go to the Emerald City together. They became friends. They started the journey to see the Wizard of Oz together. Meeting the Tin Man, a woodcutter. Dorothy and the Scarecrow continued on their journey. When they passed by a forest, they saw Tin Man, a woodcutter, standing still. Tin Man was made of tin or steel, holding an axe. But he was rusty and didn't move. Dorothy noticed Tin Man was not moving. So, she fetched some oil near Tin Man's house. Then Tin Man was able to move freely. Tin Man said he didn't have a heart and he could not feel any emotions such as love. He wanted to have a heart so that he could love and feel emotions again. Tin Man continued saying that he wanted to ask the Wizard of Oz to give him a heart. This time, Dorothy decided to help Tin Man. Tin Man got to join Dorothy's journey. Now Dorothy, Scarecrow, and Tin Man marched to the Emerald City to meet the Wizard of Oz. During their journey, Tin Man told his friends his sad life story. When he was an ordinary man, he fell in love with a girl. Then, a wicked witch was jealous of their love. She cursed him to lose his arms, legs, and even his neck. He then asked a blacksmith to repair his body. he survived anyway. Unfortunately, the witch then took away his heart, which the blacksmith was unable to repair. As a result, Tin Man's heart was left empty. Despite this, he could not help loving the girl. He was determined to get his heart back. Hearing the story of Tin Man, Dorothy soon felt Tin Man was warm-hearted. He seemed to have a kind heart already. Meeting the Cowardly Lion. As they walked along, they met Cowardly Lion, who was scared of everything, even a rat. Cowardly Lion wanted to have courage so that he could be brave and face his fears. Dorothy decided to help Cowardly Lion, too. Now all of them set off toward the Emerald City together. Adventures on Journey. In the Land of Oz, Dorothy made friends with Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion. Together, they went on a journey to see the Wizard of Oz. They hoped the Wizard of Oz could give what they wanted. Scarecrow needed to have a brain to be brilliant. Tin Man wanted a heart to feel emotions. Cowardly Lion wanted to gain courage to be brave. Dorothy wanted to go back home in Kansas. Scarecrow's brilliant ideas. Along the way, they came across a big, wide river that they needed to cross. But they didn't know how to swim, and there was no bridge to cross over. Scarecrow came up with a brilliant idea. He saw a big pile of woods nearby and suggested they build a raft. Dorothy, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion all helped to collect the woods and build the raft. When the raft was completed, they all climbed aboard and pushed it into the water. They slowly paddled across the river. Dorothy observed that despite not having a brain, Scarecrow displayed remarkable wisdom. Whenever the group got lost on the way to the Emerald City, it was Scarecrow who helped them find the right way. And whenever unexpected obstacles arose, Scarecrow was quick to devise a plan of action. Dorothy believed Scarecrow itself was one of the smartest in the world, so he didn't need a brain at all. Cowardly Lion's brave acts. The raft was in the middle of the river with a strong current. The raft was out of control and floating down forever. Somebody had to do something before they all drowned and died. But nobody was able to move because they were scared. All of a sudden, Cowardly Lion took a deep breath and jumped into the water. He started to pull the raft toward the opposite riverbank. In the beginning, Cowardly Lion was too scared to go into the water, to pull the raft and to cross the river. But he knew that he had to be brave for his friends. Cowardly Lion swam as hard as he could and pulled the raft to the other side. He was not a cowardly lion any longer. His friends were proud of him for being brave and facing his fear. All of them made it safely to the other side of the river and continued on their journey to see the Wizard of Oz. From then on, they worked together to overcome any obstacles they faced on their adventure. Tin Man's warm heart. One day, Dorothy and her friends, Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion found themselves in a strange field full of flowers. As they walked through the field, Dorothy, Cowardly Lion, and Toto suddenly felt very tired and fell asleep on the spot. Scarecrow and Tin Man tried to wake them up, but failed. They looked around and saw that other animals and creatures in the field were still sleeping dead. Neither Scarecrow nor Tin Man could not wake their friends. They didn't know what to do. Scarecrow and Tin Man were sure that all of them should get out of this deadly field as soon as possible. If not, their friends would sleep forever and die in the end. But they didn't know what to do. Then, Tin Man saw a small mouse chased by a big cat. The small mouse looked terrified and desperate. Out of pity for the escaping mouse, Tin Man swung his axe in front of the cat and drove off the cat. The small mouse thanked Tin Man for saving her life. She turned out to be a queen mouse in the field. In return for Scarecrow's warm-hearted kindness, she ordered her mice to carry Dorothy, Toto, and Lion out of the dangerous field. As a result, Tin Man's warm-hearted actions saved his friends' lives in the dangerous field. The Emerald City. Dorothy and her friends arrived at the outskirts of the Emerald City, where the Great Wizard of Oz resided in his majestic palace. Dorothy and her friends visited a small house to rest and asked its owner if they could stay overnight. After hearing about their adventures, the owner said all the people in the Emerald City had never seen the Great Wizard, as he had not let anyone see him before. He mentioned that all the people in Oz had only heard of the Great Wizard, but nobody had seen him ever. The throne chair had been always empty. Meeting the Great Wizard of Oz. When Dorothy and her friends reached the Emerald City, they went to the Great Wizard's room to meet him. But they were not able to see the Great Wizard, only to hear his powerful voice because he was invisible. The Great Wizard told them that he could help them only if they killed the Wicked Witch of the West and brought him the witch's broomstick. Dorothy and her friends were scared and disappointed, but they knew they had to try. They went out of the Emerald City to find the Wicked Witch of the West. Defeating the Wicked Witch of the West. Dorothy and her friends went to the castle where the Wicked Witch of the West lived. They couldn't defeat her because she was so strong and powerful. Fortunately, Dorothy happened to pour water on the witch. The witch melted and died because she was very weak against water. Dorothy and her friends took the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. They brought it to the Great Wizard of Oz. The real identity of the Great Wizard of Oz. When Dorothy gave him the broomstick, the Great Wizard of Oz revealed that he was not really a wizard. He was just an ordinary circus man from Kansas. He got stuck in Oz while traveling by balloon. People in the central part of Oz took him as a powerful wizard because he flew in a balloon. He was asked to become a ruler by the people of Oz. As he was not a real wizard, he was afraid of the bad witches because he had no magical power. He ordered them to build the Emerald City against the wicked witches of the East and the West. He had to pretend to be a strong wizard. He made people call him the Great Wizard of Oz. Some people called him the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. He was really happy when he heard that Dorothy had destroyed the Wicked Witch of the East. So, he asked Dorothy and her friends to kill the Wicked Witch of the West. Now that the two wicked witches of the East and the West were all gone, he was so happy and thanked Dorothy and her friends. Wishes fulfilled except Dorothy's. He finished his story and thought for a while. In turn, he had to keep his promise. Even though he was not a great wizard, he was a clever genius indeed. He gave Scarecrow a diploma in knowledge instead of a real brain. Scarecrow got content. He presented Tin Man with a heart-shaped clock instead of a real heart. Tin Man felt happy and touched. He awarded Cowardly Lion a Medal of Courage. The lion felt like a king of the jungle. All their wishes seemed to have been fulfilled, except for Dorothy's. The man promised to help Dorothy return to her home in Kansas with great sincerity and dedication. Going back home. A few days later, a big balloon was made for the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy to go back to Kansas. But Dorothy was late because of her dog Toto. Dorothy felt sad as she watched the balloon go up without her. She was disappointed. Then, another good witch, the Good Witch of the South, came to see Dorothy. Her name was Glinda. When Dorothy asked her a favor, the good witch smiled and said, "You already have a pair of magic shoes that will take you anywhere." The good witch told Dorothy that she had to click her magic heels 3 times and say there's no place like home. Dorothy did as the witch said. She went back to her home in Kansas in no time. Now she was happy with her aunt and uncle. She smiled and said, "There's no place like home." Snow White. Once upon a time in the middle of winter, the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the clouds. A warm-hearted queen sat at her palace window with an ebony black frame. She was stitching her husband's shirts. While looking at the snow, she pricked her own finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. Now the red looked so well upon the white. She said, "Oh, I wish I would have a child as white as this snow, as red as this blood, and as black as the wood of this frame." Soon afterwards a little daughter was born to her. She was as white as snow, and with cheeks as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. From this she was named Snow White. Before long, her mother died. About a year afterwards, the king married another wife. She was very beautiful. However, she was so proud and haughty that she could not bear anyone to be better looking than herself. She owned a magic mirror. When she stepped in front of it, she said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror replied, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then she was pleased because she knew that the mirror always speaks truly. Little Snow White grew up day by day. She became prettier and prettier. Now she was as beautiful as the noonday. In fact, she became more beautiful than the queen herself. All the people said that she was the most beautiful and fairest girl in the world. One day, the queen asked her mirror again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday, but Snow White is the fairest now." This answer so angered the queen that she became quite yellow with envy. From that time, whenever she saw Snow White, her heart was hardened against her. She hated the little girl. Her envy and jealousy increased so high that she had no rest day or night. One day, she called a huntsman and said, "Take the child away into a forest. I will never look upon her again. You must kill her and bring me her heart for a token." The huntsman listened with fear. Next day, he took the maiden away into a forest. He drew out his knife to kill her. Snow White began to cry, "Dear huntsman, save my life. I will run into the wild forest. I will never come home again." This speech softened the hunter's heart. Her beauty also so touched him that he had pity on her. The hunter said, "Well, run away then, poor child." At the same time, he thought to himself, "The wild beasts will soon devour you." He felt as if a stone had been lifted from his heart because her death was not by his hand. Just at that moment a wild boar came roaring along to the spot. As soon as the huntsman clapped eyes upon it, he caught and killed it. He took its heart and carried it to the queen for a token of his deed. Now poor little Snow White was left homeless and alone. She had nowhere to go. She was overwhelmed with grief and fear. She didn't know which way to turn and go. She ran till her feet refused to go farther. She was also bewildered at the sight of so many trees. As it was getting dark, she saw a little house nearby. She entered to rest. In this cottage, everything was very small, but very neat and elegant. In the middle stood a little table with a white cloth over it, and 7 little plates upon it. Each plate had a spoon, a knife, and a fork. There were also 7 little mugs. Against the wall were 7 little beds arranged in a row, each covered with white sheets. Snow White, being both hungry and thirsty, ate a little morsel of porridge out of each plate. She drank a drop or 2 of wine out of each mug. As she was so tired, she laid herself down on one bed. But it did not suit her at all. She tried another. But that was too narrow. Another was too short. Another too hard. The last one, or the 7th, was just the thing. She tucked herself up in it. She went to sleep, first saying her prayers as usual. When it became quite dark, the owners of the cottage came home. They were 7 dwarfs. They dug for gold and silver in the mountains all day long. These 7 dwarfs first lighted 7 little lamps and saw at once that somebody had been in, because everything was not in the order in which they had left it. The first dwarf asked, "Who has eaten off my plate?" The second added, "Who has sat on my chair?" The third said, "Who has nibbled at my bread?" The fourth cried, "Who has eaten my porridge?" The fifth wondered, "Who has used my fork?" The sixth grumbled out, "Who has cut with my knife?" The seventh said, "Who has drunk out of my mug?" Then the first dwarf, looking around, began again, "Who has lain on my bed?" That was because he knew that his sheets were tumbled. At these words, the others went to each bed. Looking at beds, 5 dwarfs except 7th one cried out, "Someone has been here in our beds." At that moment, the 7th little man, running up to his bed, saw Snow White sleeping in it. He called his companions. He shouted at his friends to come. Then they held up their own lamps together. The bright light fell upon the little girl. 7 dwarfs shouted with wonder and held up their 7 lamps so that the light fell upon the little girl. "Oh, heavens! Oh, heavens," said they, "what a beauty she is!" They were so delighted to see how beautiful Snow White was. They would not awaken her, leaving her to sleep. Instead, the 7th dwarf, in whose bed she was, slept 1 hour with each of his fellows. So passed the night. As soon as morning dawned, Snow White awoke and was quite frightened when she saw the 7 little men. The 7 dwarfs were friendly and asked her what she was called. "My name is Snow White," was her reply. "Why have you come into our cottage?" they asked. Then she told them how her stepmother would have had her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life. She explained how she had wandered about the whole day until at last she had found their house. When her tale was finished, the dwarfs said, "Will you look after our household? Can you be our cook, make the beds, wash, sew, knit for us, and keep everything in neat order? If so, we will keep you here, and you shall want nothing." Snow White answered, "Yes, with all my heart and will." From then on, she remained with them and kept their house in order. In the morning the dwarfs went into the mountains and searched for silver and gold. In the evening they came home and found their meals ready for them. During the day, the maiden was left alone. Therefore, the good dwarfs warned her to be careful. They warned, "Be careful of your stepmother, who will soon know of your being here. So let nobody enter the cottage." Meanwhile, the queen believed that she was now above all the most beautiful woman in the world. One day she stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. But Snow White is the fairest now, the 7 dwarfs protect her from your sway. Amid the forest far away." This reply surprised her. In no time, she knew that the mirror spoke the truth. She knew, therefore, that the huntsman had deceived her, and that Snow White was still alive. In her secret chamber, she dyed her face and clothed herself as a peddler woman so that no one could recognize her. In this disguise, she went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door of the hut and called out, "Fine goods for sale. Beautiful goods for sale." Snow White peeped out of the window and said, "Good day, my good woman. What do you have to sell?" "Fine goods, beautiful goods," the female peddler replied. "Waist ribbons of all colors." She held up one which was made of many-colored silks. "I may let in this honest woman," thought Snow White. Snow White unbolted the door and bargained for 1 waist ribbon. "Look how they suit you," exclaimed the old woman. "Let me lace them up for you." Snow White suspected nothing. She let the old woman do as she wished. The old woman laced her up so quickly and so tightly that all her breath went out. Snow White fell down like dead. Finally, Snow White is out of breath. "She is soon dead," thought the old woman to herself. She exclaimed, "Now I am once more the most beautiful of all." The wicked stepmother queen hastened away. At twilight, not long after the stepmother had left, the 7 dwarfs came home. They were much frightened at seeing their dear little maid lying on the ground, neither moving nor breathing, as if she were dead. When they saw that she was laced too tight, they cut the waist ribbon to pieces. Sooner or later she began to breathe again. Little by little she revived. The dwarfs now heard what had taken place. They said, "The old peddler woman must be no other than your wicked stepmother. Take more care of yourself. Let no one enter when we are not with you." Meanwhile, the queen had reached home. Before her mirror, she repeated her usual words, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror replied as before, "The queen was fairest yesterday. But Snow White is the fairest now, the 7 dwarfs protect her from your sway. Amid the forest far away." As soon as the mirror had finished, all her blood rushed to her head because she was so angry to hear that Snow White was yet living. "But now," thought she to herself, "I will make something which shall destroy her completely." In her secret chamber, she made a poisoned comb by evil arts. The next day, disguising herself again, she took the form of an old widow. She went over the 7 hills to the house of the dwarfs. She knocked at the door and called out, "Good wares to sell today." Snow White peeped out and said, "You must go farther because I dare not let you in." "But still you may look," said the old woman. She drew out her poisoned comb and held it up. The sight of this comb pleased the maiden so much that she allowed herself to be persuaded and opened the door. As soon as she had bought something, the old woman said, "Now let me for once comb your hair properly." Snow White agreed. Scarcely was the comb drawn through her hair when the poison began to work. The maiden fell down senseless. The wicked queen cried with joy, "It is now all over with you." She departed in a hurry. Fortunately, the evening soon came. The 7 dwarfs returned. As soon as they saw Snow White lying, like a dead person, on the ground, they suspected the queen. On discovering the poisoned comb, they immediately drew it out. Then the maiden very soon revived and told them all that had happened. So again, they warned her against the devil's stepmother and asked her to open the door to nobody. On her arrival home, the queen had again consulted her mirror and received the same answer as twice before. The mirror replied as before. The queen was fairest yesterday. But Snow White is the fairest now, the 7 dwarfs protect her from your sway. Amid the forest far away. This made her tremble and foam with rage and jealousy. She swore that Snow White should die even if it cost her own life. She went into an inner secret chamber where no one could enter. There, she made an apple of the most deep and subtle poison. Outwardly, this apple looked nice enough to have rosy cheeks. It would make the mouth of everyone who looked at its water. But its poison was so fatal that whoever would eat the smallest piece of it would surely die. As soon as the apple was ready, the queen again dyed her face. She clothed herself like a peasant's wife. Then over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs, she made her way. She knocked at the door. Snow White stretched out her head and said, "I dare not let anyone enter. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me." "That is hard on me," said the old woman, "because I must take back my apples, but there is one which I will give you for free." "No," answered Snow White, "I dare not take it. You should go right now." "What are you afraid of?" cried the old woman. "I can't go with your doubt. See me. I will cut the apple in halves. I will eat the green part. It surely gives you trust. Then, you may eat the red cheek." When Snow White saw the woman eating the green part, she could no longer resist. Snow White stretched out her hand and took the poisoned part, the red cheek. Scarcely had she placed a piece in her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. Then the evil queen looked at her with glittering eyes and laughed aloud bitterly. She exclaimed, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony is gone. This time the dwarfs cannot reawaken you." She reached home as soon as possible and consulted her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror replied, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then her envious heart was at rest as peacefully as an envious heart could rest. When the little dwarfs returned home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground. This time, there appeared to be no life in her body. She seemed to be quite dead. They raised her up and tried if they could find anything poisonous. They unlaced her, uncombed her hair, and even washed her with water, and then with wine. But nothing availed. The dear child was really and truly dead. Then they laid her upon a bier, which is a kind of coffin, along with its stand. All 7 placed themselves around it. Strangely enough, she looked still fresh and lifelike. Moreover, even her red cheeks had not deserted her. They wept and wept for 3 days without ceasing. Then they were prepared to bury her. They said to one another, "But we cannot bury her in the black ground." Then they ordered a case to be made of glass. The dwarfs wrote her name with golden letters on the glass, saying that she was a king's daughter. The dwarfs placed the glass case upon a flat rock. One of them always remained by it watching. Through this glass case, they could see the body on all sides. Snow White lay peacefully in her case and did not change. She looked as if she were only asleep. She was still white as snow, red as blood, and black-haired as ebony. Even the birds bewailed the loss of Snow White. Animals in the forest came to protect the body of Snow White. It happened while a king's son was traveling in the forest. He came to the dwarf's house to pass the night. When he had examined it, he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have this glass case. I will pay what you like for it. As I have already seen her beauty, I cannot live without Snow White. I will honor and protect her as long as I live." The dwarfs replied, "We will not sell it for all the gold in the world." The prince said again, "Then give it to me, please." When the dwarfs saw that he was so much in earnest, they pitied him. At last, they gave him the glass case of Snow White. The prince ordered it to be carried away on the shoulders of his attendants. On their journey, it happened that the attendants stumbled over a small rock. From this shock, the piece of poisoned apple which lay in Snow White's mouth fell out. Very soon she opened her eyes and raised the lid of the glass case. She rose up and asked, "Where am I?" Full of joy, the prince answered, "You are safe with me." He told her what she had suffered and how he would rather have her than any other for his wife. He asked her to accompany him home to the castle of his father. Snow White consented. They were going to get married with great splendor and magnificence. Snow White's stepmother was also invited to the wedding. When she was dressed in all her finery to go, she first stood in front of her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" It replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday, but the prince's bride is the fairest now." At these words, the queen was in a fury. She was so terribly mortified that she didn't know what to do with herself. At first, she resolved not to go to the wedding. Still, she could not resist the wish to see the princess. So, she went to the wedding. As soon as she saw the bride, she recognized that the bride was Snow White. She was so terrified with rage and astonishment that she rushed out of the castle. She rushed towards a high cliff. From then on, she was never heard of again. Snow White and the prince got married and lived happily ever after. Heidi, the Alpine Girl. In a big and beautiful mountain called the Alps, the sun shone brightly in the clear sky on a hot June morning. Little Heidi walked slowly on a mountain path, following her aunt, Dete. Heidi was going to her new home. She was just 6 years old, so her steps were small and tough. Aunt Dete and Heidi walked through the village, on their way up the mountain. The villagers sometimes stopped to ask questions because they were curious. "Is this the girl your sister left when she passed away? Where are you taking her?" one person asked. With a sad heart, Aunt Dete said, "Yes, this is Heidi. I'm taking her to live with her grandfather. I got a job in the city, and I can't take care of her anymore." The villagers felt sorry for Heidi. While Aunt Dete talked to the villagers, Heidi had a chance to explore. She met a boy named Peter, who took care of the village's goats. Every morning, Peter took the goats to the mountains to eat. Now, Heidi was following Peter with curiosity, even though it was hot and her clothes were heavy. The hot sun made Heidi's clothes very uncomfortable, so she decided to take them off. She took off her heavy clothes and was left with just her undergarments. She felt free and started running after Peter, and they both smiled. When Aunt Dete came back from the conversation with some villagers, she saw Heidi in her undergarments. Aunt Dete was surprised and asked, "Where are your clothes?" Heidi, still happy, said, "I don't need them, Aunt Dete. I want to run like the goats." Dete scolded Heidi for being impulsive and asked Peter to get her clothes. They kept walking and climbing the mountain for another hour until they reached the top. On top of the mountain, there was Heidi's grandfather's small house, surrounded by the beautiful nature. Heidi ran to the old man, excited to meet him, and shook his hand. "Hello, grandfather," she said. The old man took her hand and looked at her young face. "Good morning," he replied, his old face showing a kind smile. Aunt Dee tried to explain why they had come. "Heidi needs to stay with you, father. I found a job in the city, and I can't take care of her anymore." The old man's reply was not very friendly. "You can go now," he said. Aunt Dee left quickly, leaving Heidi behind at her new home. Heidi was excited to explore her new place. She looked around and asked, "Where can I sleep, grandfather?" Her voice was full of curiosity. The old man, who was not very kind when she arrived, now seemed less strict. "You can sleep anywhere you like," he told her, and he pointed to a ladder behind the bed. Heidi climbed up the ladder and found herself in a cozy loft filled with sweet-smelling hay. She loved her new sleeping place because it felt rustic and charming. "I'll sleep up here," she decided, still full of her usual enthusiasm. Heidi became her grandfather's constant companion and joined him in his daily activities. She was fascinated by her grandfather's skills and watched with wonder as he made a chair just for her. When the sun went down and cast a golden light on the mountain tops, they heard the familiar whistle of the village goat herder. Peter. It was the signal for bringing the goats back to the village. Heidi's heart raced with excitement when she recognized Peter's call. She had spent many days with him in the mountains, and they had become warm friends. They continued to have carefree adventures in the Alps. Heidi's sense of wonder was always alive as she picked wildflowers, played with the goats, and enjoyed the freedom of the mountains. The old man's two goats, Daisy and Dusky, became dear to Heidi. She made a special promise to take care of a little goat who had lost its mother, and she kept that promise close to her heart. During the summertime, the warm sun and the beauty of the mountains made Heidi feel alive. She became stronger and healthier every day, and her laughter filled the alpine meadows. Her life felt as limitless as the wide horizon. When autumn came and the air turned crisp with the scent of falling leaves, Heidi's grandfather decided it was time to keep her safe from the cold winds in the Alps. The mountains could be dangerous in winter. As the first snowflakes fell, Heidi stayed inside their mountain home. She helped her grandfather make cheese and learned important skills. She enjoyed the cozy warmth of their snug hut. As the seasons changed, winter came, and the village turned into a snowy wonderland. Peter, who used to be her constant companion in the mountains, started going to school in the valley. Heidi spent her winter days doing other things. But Heidi's heart remained light because she knew the mountains would welcome her back in spring, and her days were still filled with joy on the mountainside. One day, when Peter was busy with his studies, he came to visit Heidi with some news. His grandmother wanted to meet Heidi, and she was excited to go. But there was a problem: deep snow covered the ground in winter. Heidi's grandfather said it was too dangerous to go down to the valley. Days passed, and the snowstorms outside were strong. Heidi really wanted to meet Peter's grandmother, make a new friend, and see what the valley was like. But the snow was deep, and the storms didn't stop. Finally, the sun came out and the snow stopped. Heidi's grandfather thought it was safe for her to go outside. Heidi was so happy. She put on her warm winter clothes and hopped onto her grandfather's wooden sled. They laughed all the way down the mountain, and it echoed in the mountains. The sled went down the mountain fast, and Heidi reached the valley below. She saw the village and the beautiful alpine landscape. It was a winter adventure she would always remember. When Heidi arrived, she met Peter's grandmother. She welcomed Heidi with kindness. Even though she couldn't see, Granny's smile and gentle touch made Heidi feel like she belonged. Heidi asked her why she couldn't see, and Granny replied, "I can't see, dear, but I can hear. My ears help me enjoy the beauty of life." Heidi was amazed by Granny's wisdom and kindness, and they became good friends. In the following days, Heidi spent time with Granny, who told stories and taught her important things about life. Sometimes, Heidi's grandfather came to visit, fixing things in Granny's small home. Winter continued to be beautiful, and their friendship grew stronger. Heidi's presence brought joy to Granny, Peter, and her grandfather. The mountains kept her happy, and the valley gave her new friends and wonderful memories. Heidi found a special place in this world of beauty, love, and wonder. Towards the end of Heidi's second winter with her grandfather, a visitor came to their hut. It was the village pastor and teacher. He was concerned that Heidi wasn't going to school. He asked her grandfather to let her go to school. But Heidi's grandfather said, "Heidi doesn't need school. She's growing up here with the goats and the birds. They won't teach her anything bad." The pastor and teacher said she should learn to read and write. They argued about this, but Heidi's grandfather didn't change his mind. The next day, Heidi's Aunt Deet came with an interesting offer. She said, "I have a great opportunity for Heidi. She's going to live with a rich family in Frankfurt. She will be a friend to their little girl." Heidi's grandfather was direct. "Heidi is happy here. She doesn't need to go to Frankfurt." Aunt Deet said, "This is a chance for Heidi to go to school." "Okay," her grandfather shouted. "Then take her, but don't come back again." Heidi was worried about leaving her grandfather and going to Frankfurt. But Aunt Deet told her they would be back in a day or two. She even said Heidi could bring some fresh bread for Granny, who couldn't eat hard black bread. This made Heidi feel a little better. Quickly, they left the village, and Heidi couldn't even say goodbye to Peter. Deet brought Heidi to a large house in Frankfurt owned by a wealthy man named Mr. Sesame. His daughter, Clara, was in a wheelchair because of her bad health. As her mother had passed away, taking care of Clara was Miss Rottenmeier's responsibility now. Miss Rottenmeier examined Heidi closely and didn't like her old clothes, hat, or even her name. She thought the name Heidi was unsuitable. "A proper name is Adelaide," Miss Rottenmeier said. Aunt Deet agreed, "Then we will call her Adelaide." Later, when Miss Rottenmeier wasn't around, Clara told Heidi, "You can call yourself Heidi if you like. It's okay." Heidi said, "I will go home tomorrow with some fresh bread." Clara said, "No, you came here to keep me company all day long." Heidi was happy to find fresh bread on her plate and put it in her pocket. But when a servant named Sebastian brought a meal for Heidi, she didn't know how to eat in such a formal setting. Miss Rottenmeier tried to teach Heidi proper table manners for a long time. But during the lesson, Heidi fell asleep. When she woke up, she was confused and scared. She remembered she was in Frankfurt. Several days later, while Clara was resting, Heidi went for a walk. Sebastian suggested she climb the church tower to see the city view. When she reached the top, she saw a sea of buildings without the mountains and trees she was used to. She felt disappointed. To cheer Heidi up, the church keeper showed her a basket of kittens and said, "You can have them. I'll bring them to your house." Heidi was thrilled and asked, "Can I have two?" The keeper gave her 2 kittens. When she got home, everyone welcomed her. But Miss Rottenmeier was not happy. She didn't like cats, and when she heard a noise from Heidi's pocket, she screamed. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Sebastian arrived with a big basket, and Clara opened it, letting the kittens run around. They were full of energy, and one curious kitten even climbed up Miss Rottenmeier's skirt, which made her very upset. That evening, Miss Rottenmeier decided to punish Heidi. She said, "I will lock you in the cold basement." Clara asked her to wait until her father came home to decide what to do, and Miss Rottenmeier reluctantly agreed. For the next few days, Heidi tried hard to stay out of trouble, but she was starting to feel homesick. After returning from a business trip, Mr. Sesame came home with gifts for his daughter, Clara. He was happy to see Heidi and Clara getting along so well. Their friendship brought him a lot of joy. But as days went by, Miss Rottenmeier began saying bad things about Heidi to Mr. Sesame. She told him about times when she thought Heidi caused trouble. Mr. Sesame went to talk to Miss Rottenmeier. He said firmly, "Heidi will stay. She is a wonderful friend for Clara." A few days later, Mr. Sesame went on another business trip, and Grandmama Sesame came to visit. Heidi really liked her because she was kind. One day, Grandmama tried to help Heidi read. She showed her a picture book with a boy herding goats on a mountain. Seeing the picture made Heidi think of Peter and the mountains. She started to cry because she missed home so much. Grandmama saw how much Heidi wanted to go back home. So, she made a promise. She told Heidi that she could have the picture book when she learned to read. This made Heidi very determined. She prayed every night to be able to read and go back home. After a week of hard work, Grandmama heard Heidi reading to Clara. She was so happy about Heidi's progress that she gave her the picture book, just like she promised. After Grandmama left, some strange things started happening at night. Every morning, the front door of the house was wide open, even though Sebastian locked it every night. It was a mystery that confused everyone. Sebastian and another servant decided to stay up one night to figure out why the door kept opening. While they were watching, the wind blew out their candle, and they were left in the dark. Then, the door opened again, and they saw a small figure in white clothes running up the stairs. They were scared and believed it was a ghost. The news spread, and soon everyone in the house thought the place was haunted. Mr. Sesame wanted to find out what was happening. He and his friend, Dr. Clausen, stayed up one night to see why the door opened. When it happened again, they saw that the person in white was Heidi. Mr. Sesame asked, "What are you doing, Heidi?" Heidi looked confused and said, "I don't know. I dream. I'm back with grandfather." Dr. Clausen explained that Heidi was sleepwalking because she missed her home so much. He said the best way to help her was to send her back to her grandfather. The next day, Mr. Sesame made plans to send Heidi back to the mountains. Clara was sad about it, but her father promised that she could visit Heidi with Grandmama soon. Heidi and Sebastian started their journey back to Heidi's village. When they arrived, everyone was amazed that Heidi had come back to live with her grandfather. Heidi first went to visit Peter, Granny, and handed Granny a basket of fresh bread. After that, she hurried up the mountain to see her grandfather, who was sitting outside the hut, just like the first time they met. When she reached her grandfather, she hugged him and cried out, "Grandfather!" Her grandfather, with tears in his eyes, said, "So you've come back." That night, Heidi slept in her old loft bed, feeling safe and comfortable in the place she missed. The next day, her grandfather had exciting news. He told her, "Get dressed in your best clothes, Heidi. We're going to church." They went to the village church, and her grandfather talked to the pastor. He told the pastor that they would move to the village for the winter, and Heidi would go to school. The villagers were surprised to see the pastor and her grandfather talking and becoming friends. Her grandfather had changed a lot since Heidi came back. On their way back from the church, he said, "I never thought I would be this happy again." Heidi had brought happiness back into his life. Peter often invited Heidi to join him in taking care of the goats, but she was usually busy with her chores and looking forward to her friends from Frankfurt visiting. One day, as she looked down the mountain, she saw someone coming. It was Dr. Clausen. Heidi and her grandfather welcomed him warmly. Heidi asked about Clara and Grandmama, and Dr. Clausen explained that Clara was sick and couldn't visit until spring when the weather was better. This news made Heidi sad, but she was happy to see Dr. Clausen. That winter, Heidi and her grandfather moved to the village and rented a small house. Heidi missed the mountains, but she was excited to go to school and study her lessons. Peter, on the other hand, rarely went to school. One day, Heidi asked Peter why he missed school so often. Peter said, "I couldn't stop the sled. It went straight through the village. I couldn't get off, and when I could, it was too late for school." Grandfather warned Peter sternly, "If you do that again, you'll be in trouble with me." During a visit to Granny, they found out she was very sick and couldn't get out of bed. Heidi read to her to cheer her up. Heidi thought Peter should learn to read so he could read to Granny too and make her feel better. At first, Peter found reading hard, but Heidi was patient and encouraged him. She taught him the ABCs using a book from Clara, and soon he could read a few words. A few weeks later, Peter had learned a lot and could read to Granny. The whole village heard about how Heidi had taught Peter to read, and everyone was impressed by her dedication and teaching skills. With spring painting the mountains in vibrant green, Heidi and her grandfather returned to their mountain hut, surrounded by the beauty of nature's rebirth. It was a testament to the wonders of Heidi's mountain home. One day, Peter brought a letter to Heidi that filled her with joy. It was from Clara and her grandmama, letting Heidi know they would arrive in 6 weeks. Heidi was thrilled to see her dear friend again, but Peter had different feelings. He couldn't help but feel a bit jealous and frustrated. In June, the long-awaited day came. Clara and her grandmama approached the mountain. A man carefully pushed Clara's wheelchair, while another carried their things. Grandmama rode a horse, and they marveled at the breathtaking beauty of Heidi's mountain home. Clara couldn't hold back her tears as she wished she could run through the hills with Heidi. Her friend comforted her, saying, "Don't worry, Clara. I'll push you everywhere." Grandfather welcomed them warmly, serving large mugs of fresh goat's milk and delicious toasted cheese. They enjoyed their meal outside in the gentle sunshine and the pleasant breeze. When Clara admired Heidi's bed in the loft, she thought it must be amazing to look at the stars before falling asleep. Grandfather had an idea. He suggested that Grandmama could stay in the village while Clara stayed with them. Grandmama agreed because she thought it would be good for Clara's health. In the days that followed, Clara and Grandfather grew fond of each other. Grandfather asked Peter to make sure the goats ate the best grass so they could give Clara high-quality milk to help her get stronger. Heidi kept asking Grandfather to carry Clara to the mountaintop for a great view. But Grandfather said he'd only do it when Clara could stand on her own. Heidi shared this with Peter, which made him even more upset and angry. One morning, Peter rushed to the hut and saw Clara's empty wheelchair left outside. Peter, filled with frustration, kicked the wheelchair, and it tumbled down the mountainside. He ran away without hurting the goats. When Grandfather and Heidi came out of the hut, they couldn't find the wheelchair. They searched for it and found it broken into pieces down the mountain. Heidi thought it might have been the wind, but Clara started crying, saying she'd never reach the mountain top. Grandfather comforted Clara and promised to carry her to the peak. Then he went to find Peter, who was supposed to watch the goats. Grandfather scolded Peter for not doing his job and asked about the missing wheelchair. Peter just shook his head and denied everything. A few days later, as Clara's wheelchair had been broken, Grandfather put Clara on his back and carried her up to the mountains with Heidi and Peter. They arrived at a hill. Then Grandfather left Peter, Clara, and Heidi on the mountain as he went home for lunch. Heidi wanted to show Clara the most beautiful flowers. With Peter's help, Heidi and Peter started walking, and suddenly, far behind, Clara took a step and said, "I'm walking." She was amazed herself. When Grandfather came back, he was thrilled to see Clara walking, showing her determination and the mountain's healing power. Clara kept practicing and got better each day. Grandmama arrived a week later and was amazed by Clara's progress. She thanked Grandfather and Heidi for taking care of Clara and the mountain's fresh air that helped her. Grandfather suggested inviting Clara's father, Mr. Sesame, to see the incredible change. Mr. Sesame arrived at the hut, expecting to meet Clara and Heidi. As Clara ran towards him, he couldn't believe his eyes and said, "It's a miracle." He thanked Grandfather and Heidi for their wonderful care. Grandmama went to Peter, who had been hiding. She understood how he felt and offered her understanding. She hoped he would always cherish their time together. Finally, Mr. Sesame, Grandmama, and Clara left. Clara was sad to say goodbye, but Heidi assured her they would meet again when summer returned. Clara watched her friend from a distance while Heidi stood on the mountain, waving until they were out of sight.